Welcome back, everybody. Today we're diving into, well, it's a pretty unique chapter of history, wouldn't you say? Russian-Jewish relations over, well, centuries, really.
Definitely a long history.
Yeah, you guys sent us some amazing stuff, including some excerpts from Alexander Solzhenitsyn's 200 Years Together, right?
That's right.
And it's a complicated story full of, well, some pretty dark moments.
Yeah, it's definitely a story with some challenges.
But I think what we're really trying to do today is understand how this relationship between, Russian Jews and the Russian state itself, how it kind of evolved, over time.
Absolutely. It's really interesting, to see how those dynamics change. And those changes, we can really see them, like, right from the start, even with something like Catherine the Great's decrees.
Oh, Catherine the Great.
Right.
Those decrees, they, restricted where Jewish people could live and travel within Russia. They were
Yeah.
basically confined to what was called White Russia.
Yeah, exactly. And you could argue that confinement, he kind of set the stage for some of the economic tensions that would come up later. I mean, Catherine, she was okay with having Jews in newly acquired territories, right, as a way to, boost development and stuff. But she didn't want them migrating, deeper into, like, the heartland of Russia.
The source material, it talks about the role of Jews in the alcohol trade in White Russia.
Right.
It mentions Jewish people, like managing taverns and leasing distilleries.
Yeah.
From Polish landlords, actually.
Mm-hmm.
I'm wondering, was this just a matter of circumstance, or were there, deeper economic forces at play here?
That's a great question. And I think, the answer is it's kind of both. On the one hand, Jewish people were often prevented from owning land or, working in certain professions. So naturally, they kind of gravitated towards industries where they could find opportunities. But on the other hand, you had specific policies like those that limited Jewish guild membership, which really intentionally restricted their participation in, other parts of the economy.
So it's like those decrees almost, created this self-fulfilling prophecy, right? By pushing Jewish people into these specific roles, it kind of fueled resentment from the Russian peasantry.
Yeah, for sure.
Who saw them, profiting off of, well, pretty tough times, really.
Exactly. And it's important, to remember the historical context here and avoid placing blame. But we can't ignore the fact that these economic structures, they really did create this breeding ground for resentment and accusations of exploitation.
Yeah, it's almost like that saying, give a man a fish, you feed him for a day, teach a man to fish, you feed him for a lifetime. But in this case, the opportunity denied.
Such a good analogy. Yeah. And that's something that, comes up over and over in this history.
Right.
You have Jewish communities who want to integrate, to contribute more broadly to society, but they're constantly hitting these barriers and limitations.
Let's jump ahead a little to the 19th century.
Okay.
We start to see some attempts at reform under Tsar Alexander I, like things like tax exemptions and, extended loan repayment periods for Jewish settlers. But the Pale of Settlement, that restriction on where they could live,
Right.
it stayed. It remained firmly in place.
It's a real paradox, isn't it?
Totally.
I mean, Alexander I, he wanted to encourage Jewish economic activity, but he also wanted to keep them geographically isolated.
He couldn't decide if he wanted them in or out. I wonder if that contributed to the debate about Jewish integration that was going on at the time.
Definitely. I mean, it sent these mixed messages,
Yeah.
and that just fueled tensions, both within the Jewish community and in, broader Russian society.
It's interesting, though, that even within the Jewish community, there wasn't this single viewpoint on integration, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
You're right. The source material, it highlights the work of Menashe Ilyar, a Jewish scholar, who actually had some pretty sharp criticisms of practices like early marriage within the community.
Yeah, Ilyar, he felt that those practices were holding Jewish people back economically. And he really advocated for a broader range of professions, including, things like agriculture.
Interesting.
It shows that even internally there were different ideas about, how to navigate their place in Russia.
So you have this external pressure from the state with its, confusing mix of reforms and restrictions.
Yeah.
And then internally, you have this very diverse community
Yeah.
grappling with its own identity and path forward.
It's a really multi-layered story with no easy answers.
Right.
But that's what makes it so fascinating. And things get even more complex when we move into the reign of Tsar Nicholas I. He took a totally different approach,
Okay.
introducing mandatory military service for Jews.
Whoa, talk about a game changer.
Absolutely.
That must have been like a massive shock to the system.
Oh, for sure. It set off, a huge debate,
Yeah.
both within the Jewish community and the government itself. Some people saw it as like a sign of progress, a step towards equality. But for others, it sparked fear and resistance. Imagine being told you have to fight for a country that, that still treated you as a second-class citizen.
Yeah, you really hit the nail on the head there.
Mm.
It must have felt like this impossible dilemma. The source material, it even mentions Jewish communal organizations, the Kehalim,
Right.
trying to soften the blow of this new policy,
Yeah.
even, to the point of trying to influence government officials.
Yeah, those Kehalim played a really, really interesting role. They became this bridge between the Jewish community and the Russian authorities, constantly negotiating, advocating, even trying to, manipulate the system to protect their people.
The source material mentions one Russian official, and he actually compared conscription to, and I'm quoting here, collecting humans rather than money.
Wow.
It gives you a sense of the ethical dilemmas that were just like swirling around this whole issue.
Yeah, and it reveals, how conflicted even those in the government were about integrating Jews into Russian society. It was never a black and white issue.
It sounds like despite all his efforts, Nicholas didn't really solve what he saw as the unassimilability of the Jewish population. He tried to force integration through military service. But those underlying tensions, they remained.
Yeah, his reign is a textbook example of this push and pull between the state and the Jewish community. And this tension that remained unresolved, it would ultimately set the stage for the tragedies that would unfold, in the late 19th and early 20th centuries.
Which brings us to, well, probably one of the darkest chapters in this whole story, the pogroms.
A truly horrifying period,
Yeah.
and a turning point that would have ripple effects throughout the 20th century and even beyond.
Let's dive into that next.
The pogroms, they really cast this long shadow over Russian-Jewish relations. There were these just horrific bursts of violence, targeting Jewish communities, often with devastating consequences.
And the sources, I mean, they don't hold back.
No.
They talk about accusations leveled at the government, some saying that, like, they actually orchestrated the violence, while others say, well, they just failed to prevent it.
Yeah.
Either way, it's not a good look.
No, not at all. And you can see why so many Jewish people started to feel, utterly betrayed by the state. It was
Yeah.
like the rug had been pulled out from under them.
Yeah.
All those attempts at integration, at finding like a place in Russian society, they suddenly seemed meaningless in the face of such brutality.
The 1905 Odessa pogrom, that one really stands out,
Yeah.
even amidst all the other atrocities.
It was a horrific event, just horrific, left, an indelible scar on the Jewish community. And it's no coincidence that after Odessa, we see this surge in Jewish involvement in revolutionary movements like the Bund.
It seems like for many, the pogroms were like this breaking point.
Yeah.
They no longer believed that change could come from within the system.
Exactly. For them, revolutionary movements, they offered a way to fight back, to seize control of their own destiny, and to build a society based on justice and equality. They saw it as a path to liberation, not domination.
But that path would lead them to another complicated chapter.
Yeah.
The role of Jews in Bolshevism and the early Soviet regime.
This is a topic that's so often, distorted and misused.
Right.
So it's really important to approach it with nuance, with a lot of nuance.
Yeah.
The sources are very clear on that point.
They point out the undeniable fact that
Yeah.
there was a significant Jewish presence in the early Bolshevik leadership.
Yeah.
Figures like Trotsky, for example, played, prominent roles. But the sources, they also urge us to look deeper,
Yeah.
to understand the motivations
Right.
behind this involvement.
And when you do, you see that for many Jewish revolutionaries, their participation was driven by this burning desire for social justice. I mean, they
Yeah.
had experienced firsthand the deep inequalities and injustices of the Tsarist regime, culminating in the horrors of the pogroms.
So they joined the revolution not to, seize power for themselves,
No.
but to overturn a system that they saw as fundamentally oppressive, not just for Jews, but for for everyone.
Precisely. Their goal was to create a more equitable society, free from the shackles of class, religion, ethnicity.
Mm.
Of course, the reality of the Soviet experiment, well, it turned out to be far more complicated
Yeah.
and often tragic.
That's where the concept of Soviet anti-Semitism comes in.
And this is where things get really nuanced.
Okay.
While the Bolsheviks, they officially condemned anti-Semitism and even took steps to combat, more traditional forms of prejudice, a more subtle form of discrimination that kind of emerged within the Soviet system.
What did that look like?
Well,
How did it differ from the more overt anti-Semitism of the Tsarist era?
it often manifested as suspicion towards Jewish cultural and religious identity. There was this push for assimilation, for everyone to embrace a single Soviet identity, which, often meant suppressing distinct cultural or religious practices. And this, of course, created a real dilemma for Soviet Jews.
It's almost like they were caught in this double bind,
Yeah.
right? They'd been active participants in this revolution that promised equality.
Right.
But then they found themselves facing this new form of exclusion.
It's a tragic irony, isn't it? And it really highlights the complexities of identity and the enduring power of prejudice, even within systems that claim to be based on equality and social justice.
It also sets the stage for, well, the next major turning point in the story.
Yeah.
A turning point that would impact not just Soviet Jews, but the entire world, the Holocaust.
A period of unimaginable horror. And what's striking, looking back, is how the Soviet press, controlled by the state, they went to great lengths to downplay the scale of this tragedy.
The source material it's really jarring in that respect.
Yeah.
It describes how the Soviet press presented the Holocaust as just another atrocity of war, rather than, the systematic targeted genocide that it truly was.
It really speaks volumes about the Soviet government's tendency to control information and to shape narratives to fit their own agenda.
It's almost like they were trying to erase the specific targeting of Jews from the narrative.
Yeah.
As if acknowledging the full extent of the Holocaust would somehow undermine their ideology.
It's a chilling reminder of the dangers of state-controlled media and the importance of seeking out multiple perspectives.
It's especially poignant when you consider the sheer scale of Jewish suffering under the Nazi regime. Millions perished, entire communities wiped out.
The impact on Soviet Jewry was catastrophic, and the fact that this wasn't fully acknowledged, that their suffering was in some ways minimized, it just adds another layer of tragedy to this already horrific chapter.
After the war, there were these discussions about Jewish resettlement in Crimea.
Right.
It seems like once again, the idea of a territorial solution to the Jewish question was being floated.
It's interesting how this theme keeps recurring throughout history. The idea of creating a separate Jewish homeland, whether in Palestine or elsewhere, it was a recurring topic of debate, both within the Jewish community and among, those in power.
It reflects this ongoing search for a place where Jewish people could live free from persecution and discrimination.
But these discussions about Crimea, they ultimately went nowhere.
Why was that? What happened?
Well, anti-Semitism, it didn't just magically disappear with the defeat of Nazi Germany. In fact, it reared its ugly head once again in the post-war Soviet Union.
And this resurgence culminated in a truly chilling episode, the doctor's plot.
A fabricated conspiracy theory accusing Jewish doctors of plotting to assassinate Soviet leaders.
Yeah.
It was a blatant attempt to scapegoat and demonize an entire group of people.
It's hard to believe that something so absurd could actually gain traction. What was the motivation behind this?
It was partly driven by Stalin's paranoia and,
Yep.
and his desire to consolidate power, but it also tapped into these deep-seated anti-Semitic prejudices that sadly still lingered within Soviet society.
The impact of the doctor's plot, it must have been devastating for Soviet Jews.
Absolutely. It created this climate of fear and suspicion.
Mhm.
People were afraid to speak out, to practice their religion openly, or even to associate with other Jews. It was a dark period, a time of of intense repression.
So it's no surprise that the desire to emigrate from the Soviet Union, it intensified during this period.
Emigration became this beacon of hope for many Soviet Jews,
Yeah.
a way to escape the persecution and uncertainty they faced at home.
Yeah.
But leaving the Soviet Union, well, it was no easy feat.
The sources, they mentioned bureaucratic obstacles,
Right.
social stigma, and even outright persecution for those who sought to leave.
The Soviet regime, they tightly controlled emigration,
Hmm.
viewing it as like a betrayal of the socialist ideal Jews who applied to leave. They often faced immense difficulties, losing their jobs, being ostracized by their communities, and sometimes even imprisoned.
It sounds like a truly heartbreaking situation to have finally, found a place where you feel like you can belong, only to have that dream crushed by the very system you helped create.
It's a tragic reminder of the human cost of totalitarian regimes and the importance of individual liberty.
Despite these immense challenges, the source material makes it clear that Soviet Jews continued to make significant contributions to their society, particularly in fields like literature, music, and science. It's a testament to their resilience, their talent, and their unwavering determination to make a difference.
It really is. They faced incredible adversity, yet they persevered, enriching Russian culture in countless ways.
But alongside these achievements, we also see the emergence of Jewish dissident voices.
Right.
People who dared to challenge the Soviet system from within.
The sources talk about figures like Alexander Solzhenitsyn, who, while not Jewish himself,
Right.
included Jewish characters in his works and sparked debates about their portrayal.
It seems like even within the dissident movement,
Yeah.
there were disagreements and complexities in how Jewish identity was represented and understood.
It highlights this ongoing search for identity and belonging.
Yeah.
Within a society that was both restrictive and often hostile towards difference.
It's a reminder that even those united by a common cause or can have different perspectives and experiences.
Exactly. It's a microcosm of the broader challenges of coexistence and understanding in a multicultural society.
This has been a truly fascinating
Yeah.
and at times, heartbreaking journey through history.
It really has, and it raises some important questions about the nature of identity, the challenges of coexistence, and the legacy of this complex relationship between Russian Jews and the state.
Let's try to tie all these threads together and
Yeah.
see what insights we can draw from this deep dive into history. We've covered centuries of history here, from Catherine the Great's decrees to the pogroms, the revolution, the whole the complexities of life in the Soviet Union. What really stands out to you looking back on all of this? Like, what's the big takeaway?
I think for me, it's that tension, that persistent tension between assimilation and cultural preservation.
Yeah.
It's this constant push and pull that you see throughout the whole.
You see it everywhere.
Yeah.
Jewish communities trying to, integrate into Russian society to find, acceptance, a sense of belonging. But at the same time, they're also fighting to maintain their own distinct cultural and religious identity.
Exactly. And that struggle was made even harder, I think, by the policies of the state, which were, they were inconsistent, often even contradictory. I mean,
Yeah.
one minute they're encouraging integration, and the next it's like crackdowns and restrictions. It just reinforces this sense of otherness,
The Pale of Settlement.
Right.
That's a perfect example. It's there, like this looming presence, this physical reminder of the limitations that were placed on Jewish life in Russia.
And then you have those horrific bursts of violence, the pogroms,
Yeah.
just shattering any illusion of progress.
Right.
Just this stark reminder that acceptance could be, fleeting, and that safety was never, truly guaranteed.
It's hard to imagine the trauma, the disillusionment.
Yeah.
It's no wonder that so many, turned to revolutionary movements. It seemed like the only path to real change.
And that leads us to, another layer of complexity, the role of Jews in the Bolshevik Revolution.
Right.
It's a topic that, it's often misrepresented and exploited, so it's really, really important to approach it with a lot of nuance.
The sources, they really emphasize that for many Jewish revolutionaries, their involvement was driven by this genuine desire for social justice.
Yeah.
This longing for a society that was, free from oppression, free from inequality. They weren't seeking power, just for the sake of power. It was about a fundamental transformation of the whole system.
Right. Their experiences under the Tsarist regime and then culminating in the horrors of the pogroms,
Of course.
that really fueled their revolutionary fervor. They saw the revolution as this chance to create a more equitable world, not just for Jews, but for everyone.
But, well, the Soviet experiment, it didn't live up to those ideals.
No.
We talked about the emergence of Soviet anti-Semitism, this more subtle form of discrimination.
Right. It targeted Jewish cultural and religious identity.
It's a reminder that even in systems that claim to be all about equality, well, prejudice can still persist.
Yeah.
And often in these really, really insidious ways.
And it created this real dilemma for Soviet Jews. I mean, they helped to build this system that ultimately, well, it turned against them, at least in part.
And then, of course, there's a Holocaust. It's impossible to talk about this history without acknowledging the devastating impact of this genocide.
It's a chilling reminder of the depths of human cruelty, I think, and the fragility of progress. And what's so striking looking back is how the Soviet state tried to downplay it.
Right.
The scale of the tragedy, they were minimizing the specific targeting of Jews.
It makes you think about the danger of state-controlled narratives, right?
Yeah.
And the importance of seeking out multiple perspectives.
Absolutely. To get the full truth of historical events.
The Holocaust was a watershed moment. And its legacy, I mean, it continues to shape our understanding of this history.
Without a doubt.
We also talk about the challenges of immigration.
Right.
How Soviet Jews who wanted to leave, they faced, incredible obstacles, often at a huge personal cost.
It really underscores those restrictions on individual liberty, the things that characterize the Soviet system.
It's heartbreaking to think about, those who they longed for a different life.
Yeah.
Who dreamed of escaping persecution, of finding freedom. And then they're met with, these bureaucratic roadblocks and social stigma.
That's a difficult story.
But despite all those challenges, the sources, they make it clear that Soviet Jews, they continued to make these remarkable contributions to their society.
They did.
Enriching Russian culture in so many ways. Their resilience and determination they're really inspiring.
It speaks to the strength of the human spirit, I think, and the power of creativity to flourish even in the face of adversity.
So after this deep dive, where do we go from here?
Yeah.
What insights can we apply to our own lives, to our understanding of the world?
I think it highlights the importance of empathy, understanding, dialogue, the challenges of coexistence, the search for identity in a multicultural society. Those themes, they resonate throughout this whole history, and they're still relevant, I think, even today.
It's a reminder that building bridges of understanding requires a willingness to listen to different perspectives,
Yes.
to acknowledge shared experiences, to confront difficult truths.
And to learn from the past,
Yeah.
both its triumphs and its tragedies, so that we can work towards a more just and compassionate future.
Well, this deep dive it's been an incredible journey. It's had its twists and turns and moments of darkness and glimmers of hope.
It really has.
It's a story that challenges us to think critically about the complexities of history and the enduring power of the human spirit.
Couldn't have said it better myself. And while we've reached the end of our exploration for today, it feels like, well, just the beginning of a much larger conversation.
Exactly. And hopefully a conversation that continues to unfold as we learn and grow and strive for a world where understanding and empathy prevail.
Couldn't agree more.
Thanks for taking this deep dive with us.